I'm Isabella, 32, a dedicated nurse who supported my husband Marcus through medical school during our 8-year marriage. We struggled financially, but our love kept us strong, or so I thought. When my father-in-law Harold passed away, leaving Marcus $450 million, everything changed overnight. My loving husband transformed into a stranger who kicked me out of our home without a second thought. Little did he know what was really in that well. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to see how karma came back for my ex-husband in the most unexpected way. I met Marcus during my night shift at Memorial Hospital 8 years ago. I was 24 then, 3 years into my nursing career, while he was a struggling 26-year-old medical student doing his clinical rotations. Our first meeting wasn't exactly romantic. I found him slumped against the wall near the vending machines, pale and disoriented. He had nearly fainted during rounds from a combination of exhaustion and poor nutrition. That's what happens when you live on ramen and coffee for weeks. When was the last time you ate a real meal? I asked while checking his blood pressure. Define real, he joked weakly. I ended up sharing my homemade lunch with him in the break room. Marcus devoured my turkey sandwich and apple slices like they were gourmet cuisine. Between bites, he told me about his grueling schedule and massive student loans. Unlike his classmates with wealthy parents, Marcus was completely on his own financially. My father could easily pay for everything, he confessed, a shadow crossing his face. But he believes I need to earn my way. Says it builds character. That was my first glimpse into the complicated relationship between Marcus and his father, Harold Lancaster, the real estate mogul whose company developed half the luxury properties in our city. Despite his family's wealth, Marcus lived like a pauper, working part-time jobs between classes and clinical rotations. Our relationship began with coffee dates between shifts. I'd finish my night shift just as he arrived for early rounds. We'd meet in the hospital cafeteria, bleary-eyed but happy to see each other. Sometimes I'd bring flashcards to help him study for exams. Other times, we'd just talk about our dreams. I want to be a cardiologist, he told me one morning. Not because it pays well, but because I want to prove to my father that I can succeed without his money. I found his determination admirable. Coming from a middle-class family myself, with parents who worked hard but always supported me emotionally, I couldn't imagine being cut off like that. My parents, Barbara and James, had taught me the value of hard work but also unconditional love. They weren't wealthy, but they had helped me through nursing school as much as they could. As our relationship deepened, I started helping Marcus with his expenses. At first, it was just groceries and the occasional textbook. Soon, I was paying a larger share of his rent, then helping with his tuition payments. I picked up extra shifts and night differentials to make it work. When he protested, I assured him it was an investment in our future. You can pay me back when you're a fancy doctor, I tease. We got married after dating for 2 years, in a modest ceremony at my parents' backyard. My family embraced Marcus completely, treating him like the son they never had. His side of the church was noticeably emptier. His mother had passed away years before, and his father refused to attend. Harold sent a cold note and a check for $5,000 instead. That's the most support he's given me in years, Marcus said, trying to laugh it off, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. His siblings, Alexandra and Thomas, made brief appearances but left before the reception, claiming prior commitments. They were fully entrenched in their father's world, working for the family business and enjoying the privileges that came with it. After the wedding, we moved into a small one-bedroom apartment near the hospital. It wasn't much, but we made it cozy with secondhand furniture and plants. I continued working as a nurse while Marcus finished medical school. Those early years were tight financially but rich in other ways. We cooked dinner together in our tiny kitchen, watch movies on my laptop, and dream about our future. Someday, Marcus would say, holding me close, I'll give you everything you deserve. I always told him I already had everything I needed. And I meant it. Money wasn't important to me compared to the love and partnership we shared. Every time I saw him studying late into the night, Determined to succeed on his own terms, I fell more deeply in love with him. Looking back now, I wonder if I was blind to the warning signs. The way he'd stare a little too long at luxury car advertisements. How he'd go quiet when we'd walk past the expensive homes his father's company had built. The occasional bitter comment about what he could have had if he'd just played by his father's rules. But in those early days, I believed completely in us. In the strength of our love and the future we were building together, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The years of Marcus's residency tested our marriage in ways I hadn't anticipated. The long hours and physical exhaustion were expected, but the financial strain nearly broke us. A first-year residence salary barely covered our rent, let alone Marcus's massive student loans. So I worked double shifts, sometimes 60 hours a week, to keep us afloat. "You should rest, Bella," Marcus would say when I'd come home with dark circles under my eyes after back-to-back shifts. "I'll rest when we're debt-free," I'd reply, massaging my aching feet. We had dreamed of starting a family right after his graduation, but reality forced us to put those plans on hold indefinitely. Each month, after paying bills and loan installments, we had nothing left for savings, let alone for the costs of raising a child. I watched my friends have baby showers and post pictures of their growing families while I worked overtime and came home to an empty apartment. "We'll have our turn," Marcus promised, squeezing my hand when we'd see parents with their children in the park. Just a few more years. I believed him. I believed in us. So I swallowed my disappointment and focused on the future. Beyond the financial support, I became Marcus's emotional rock. Medicine is a brutal field, and residency is designed to push people to their breaking points. When Marcus lost his first patient, a 7-year-old boy with an undiagnosed heart condition, he came home and cried in my arms for hours. When an attending physician humiliated him in front of a patient for a minor oversight, I helped rebuild his confidence. When exhaustion made him question his career choice, I reminded him why he wanted to be a doctor in the first place. Our financial planning became an art form. I clipped coupons religiously, bought clothes exclusively from thrift stores, and learned to cook nutritious meals on a tight budget. We hadn't taken a proper vacation in years, celebrating anniversaries with homemade dinners and walks in the park instead of the trips we dreamed about. The biggest financial hurdle was Marcus's student loans. For years of medical school had left him over $200,000 in debt, with interest accumulating daily. Every extra penny I earned went toward those loans. While my nursing colleagues upgraded their cars or put down payments on houses, I put thousands toward Marcus's debt each month. "You're paying off my loans faster than I am," Marcus noticed one evening as I showed him the latest statement. "We're a team," I reminded him. "Your debt is our debt." Despite our financial constraints, we found ways to celebrate life's small victories. When Marcus successfully performed his first solo surgery, I surprised him with a bottle of champagne I'd been saving for a special occasion. When I received a commendation from the hospital for exceptional patient care, he wrote me a beautiful card and picked wildflowers from a field near the hospital. Throughout these years, Marcus made periodic attempts to reconcile with his father. He'd send cards on birthdays and holidays, make occasional phone calls, even stop by the Lancaster Development's office once in a while. Harold remained cold and distant, always too busy to speak with his son or cutting conversations short with thinly veiled criticisms. "Still wasting your time at that public hospital?" he asked during one brief phone call I overheard. Alexandra just closed a $10 million deal for the company. Harold's empire was vast and impressive. Lancaster Developments owned prime real estate throughout the city and had expanded to 3 neighboring states. Their signature luxury condominiums and commercial properties were recognizable by their distinctive architecture and the iconic L logo displayed prominently on each building. Forbes estimated Harold's net worth at over $2 billion, a fortune he had built from an initial investment 30 years ago. While Marcus struggled financially, his siblings thrived in their father's shadow. Alexandra, 2 years younger than Marcus, served as the company's marketing director, her face frequently appearing in business magazines as one of the 30 under 30 to watch. Thomas, the youngest at 28, managed the company's commercial division, and drove a different luxury car each month. Both lived in penthouse apartments in Lancaster-developed properties. I tried several times to help heal the rift between Marcus and his father. Once, I wrote Harold a heartfelt letter describing his son's accomplishments and dedication. Another time, I arranged to accidentally run into Harold at his favorite lunch spot, hoping a face-to-face conversation might soften his heart. Nothing worked. Harold remained convinced that Marcus had made the wrong choice by pursuing medicine instead of joining the family business. He's stubborn, just like his mother, Harold told me during our brief lunch encounter. Thinks he's proving something by struggling when he could be living comfortably. He's proving that he's his own man, I countered. Isn't that something to be proud of? Harold had merely shrugged and signaled for the check. Despite these rebuffs, we continued building our life together, day by day, shift by shift, dream by dream. I believed that eventually we would emerge from these lean years stronger, with Marcus established in his career and our financial struggles behind us. I had no idea how drastically everything was about to change. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October. I had just finished my shift and was picking up groceries when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Is this Isabella Lancaster?" a formal voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Mercy Hospital. I'm calling about Harold Lancaster. He's had a severe heart attack and is asking for his son." I abandoned my shopping cart and rushed home to tell Marcus. He was asleep after a 36-hour shift, but I had to wake him for this. His father, despite their strained relationship, was potentially dying. "Dad had a heart attack?" Marcus repeated, his voice thick with sleep and disbelief. "Are you sure?" 20 minutes later, we were speeding toward Mercy Hospital, the private facility where wealthy patients received care in luxurious private suites. The contrast to our public hospital was stark. Marble floors instead of linoleum, original artwork on walls instead of faded motivational posters, silence instead of the constant beeping and announcements. We found Alexandra and Thomas already there, both immaculately dressed despite the emergency. Alexandra was on her phone, delegating business matters in a hushed voice. Thomas paced the private waiting room, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble. "He's still in surgery," Alexandra informed us coolly, barely looking up from her phone. Her eyes flicked over my scrubs. I hadn't had time to change, with barely disguised disdain. 3 hours later, a solemn doctor approached our group. "We've stabilized him, but the damage to his heart is extensive. He's asking to speak with each of you individually." Alexandra went first, emerging 20 minutes later with red-rimmed eyes but composed. Thomas followed, coming out visibly shaken. When it was Marcus's turn, I squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Do you want me to come with you?" I asked. "No, I think I need to do this alone," he replied. Marcus was in his father's room for nearly an hour. When he finally emerged, his expression was unreadable, a mixture of shock, confusion, and something I couldn't quite identify. "What happened?" I asked as we walked to the car. "He apologized," Marcus said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "For everything. Said he was wrong about me, about my choices. That he's been watching my career from a distance and is proud of what I've accomplished on my own." Harold Lancaster passed away 3 days later, never leaving the hospital. The funeral was a grand affair held at the city's oldest cathedral. Business associates, politicians, and socialites filled the pews, most of whom had probably never had a meaningful conversation with the deceased. Marcus, Alexandra, and Thomas sat in the front row, united in orphanhood if nothing else. I sat beside Marcus, holding his hand through the elaborate service. Several speakers praised Harold's business acumen and philanthropy, painting a picture of a man I hardly recognized from Marcus's stories. The mayor spoke about Harold's contributions to the city's development. The governor mentioned his generous political donations. A childhood friend shared anecdotes about Harold's determination even as a young man. Not one person mentioned his role as a father. Following the service, the Lancaster siblings were swarmed by well-wishers and business associates offering condolences that sounded more like networking opportunities. I noticed how Alexandra and Thomas smoothly worked the crowd, exchanging business cards even at their father's funeral. They treated me with cold politeness, barely acknowledging my presence except when social convention demanded it. Marcus's little nurse, Alexandra, introduced me to one of her friends, her tone making my profession sound like a quaint hobby rather than a career. The reading of the will was scheduled for the following Monday at the offices of Lancaster and Associates, the law firm that had handled Harold's legal affairs for decades. As we entered the tastefully appointed conference room, I sensed tension from Alexandra and Thomas. They sat across from us, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing at Marcus with barely concealed animosity. Frederick Caldwell, Harold's personal attorney for over 30 years, entered last. A distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, he carried a leather portfolio and had the measured movements of someone who chose his actions carefully. "Thank you all for coming," he began formally. "I'll dispense with platitudes and proceed directly to Harold's final wishes, as he would have preferred." What followed was nothing short of astonishing. After some minor bequests to loyal employees and charitable foundations, Frederick arrived at the distribution of Harold's vast fortune. "To my daughter, Alexandra, I leave the sum of $15 million, he read. Alexandra's face tightened almost imperceptibly. It was a fortune by normal standards, but clearly less than she had expected. "To my son, Thomas, I leave the sum of $15 million. Thomas didn't bother hiding his displeasure, muttering something under his breath. "And to my son, Marcus," Frederick continued, his voice revealing nothing, "I leave the remainder of my estate, estimated at $450 million, along with controlling interest in Lancaster developments." The room fell silent. Marcus gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. Alexandra stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is absurd," she hissed. "Marcus hasn't been part of the business for 10 years. He knows nothing about real estate." "I assure you, these are Harold's explicit wishes," Frederick replied calmly. "He made these changes to his will 6 months ago." "We'll contest it," Thomas threatened, his handsome face flushed with anger. "You may certainly try," Frederick responded, unperturbed. However, Harold was of sound mind and body when he made these amendments, with 2 independent physicians present to verify his capacity. "I would not advise pursuing litigation that would only deplete your own inheritances." As we left the office, Marcus was in a daze. $450 million, he kept repeating. Why would he do this? I was equally shocked but tried to remain practical. Maybe he really did regret pushing you away all these years. This could be his way of making amends. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in Marcus. He became distant, frequently taking calls in another room. He scheduled meetings with financial advisors and business consultants without including me. When I asked questions about these meetings, his answers were vague and dismissive. "It's complicated business stuff, Bella. You wouldn't understand." I tried to ignore the growing knot of unease in my stomach. After all, we had just experienced a major life change. Marcus was grieving his father while simultaneously adjusting to sudden wealth and responsibility. It was natural for him to be distracted, I told myself. Things would return to normal once the shock wore off. But as November turned to December, Marcus's transformation became impossible to ignore. He bought a $60,000 watch without consulting me. He traded in our sensible sedan for a sports car that cost more than 5 years of my salary. He began talking about moving to a penthouse in one of his father's buildings. And increasingly, he looked at me differently, with a calculating gaze that made me feel like I was being assessed rather than loved. The night everything fell apart began with such promise. Marcus texted me during my shift, "Dinner tonight at Giovanni's. 8 o'clock. Wear something nice." Giovanni's was the upscale Italian restaurant where we had always dreamed of celebrating a special occasion but could never afford. My heart lifted. Perhaps this was Marcus returning to himself, wanting to share his good fortune with me. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a blue dress I'd bought years ago for a wedding and rarely had occasion to wear since. I curled my hair, applied makeup with extra care, even splurged on a taxi rather than taking the bus. When I arrived at the restaurant, Marcus was already seated at a corner table, looking handsome in a suit that definitely wasn't from the clearance rack where he used to shop. "You look beautiful," he said, standing to greet me. For a moment, it felt like we were us again. The evening started pleasantly enough. We ordered appetizers I could never have justified before, and Marcus selected an expensive bottle of wine. He talked about the changes he was making at Lancaster Developments, the outdated practices he was modernizing, the new direction he envisioned for the company. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually enjoying the business side of things," he admitted. "There's something satisfying about watching the numbers grow." I smiled, genuinely happy to see his enthusiasm. "Your father would be proud." His expression shifted slightly at the mention of Harold. "Yes, well, speaking of my father." He took a long sip of wine. "His death has made me reevaluate many things." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. "Including our marriage," he continued, setting down his glass with deliberate precision. The waiter chose that moment to bring our main courses. I stared at my plate of pasta, suddenly nauseated. "What do you mean?" I finally asked when the waiter departed. Marcus dabbed his lips with his napkin, a gesture so casually cruel in its normalcy. "Bella, we both know we married young. We were different people then, with different expectations." "I'm the same person I've always been," I said quietly. "That's precisely the problem." His voice hardened. "I've evolved. I have responsibilities now, social obligations. I need someone who can move in the circles I now inhabit." I felt like I was in a bad movie. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I want a divorce," he stated flatly. "It's nothing personal. We've simply outgrown each other." Nothing personal. 8 years of marriage, of supporting him, loving him, believing in him, reduced to nothing personal. "This is because of the money," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Don't be childish. This is about compatibility. The money has simply clarified what I need in a partner going forward." "And what's that?" "Someone who didn't see you at your worst. Someone who didn't empty their savings account to pay your student loans." His face hardened. "Someone who knows the difference between a salad fork and a dinner fork without having to be told. Someone who doesn't wear clearance rack clothes to 5-star restaurants. Someone who enhances my image rather than..." He gestured vaguely at me. "Rather than what?" My voice was barely audible. "Rather than reminding everyone of my past. You're a walking reminder of every struggle, every humiliation, every time I had to scrimp and save. Do you know how it looks when business associates ask what my wife does and I have to say you're a nurse?" Each word was a dagger. "You used to be proud that I was a nurse." "I used to be a lot of things." He signaled for the check. "The truth is, Bella, you're useless to me now. I paid off my student loans yesterday. The debt is cleared. I don't need your salary anymore. I don't need your coupon clipping or your double shifts or your constant reminders about budgeting." The waiter brought the check, and Marcus casually handed over his new black credit card without even glancing at the total. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. He'll be in touch. I'm prepared to be generous with the settlement, provided you don't make this difficult." My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Where am I supposed to go? That's not really my concern, is it? He checked his watch, the $60,000 watch. "I need you out of the apartment by tomorrow. I'm having it redecorated." "Tomorrow? I've lived there for 6 years. And now you won't." He stood up. "You have 24 hours. Anything you leave behind will be disposed of." I sat there, unable to move, as he walked out of the restaurant without a backward glance. Somehow, I made it home, to what had been our home until an hour ago. In a daze, I began packing my belongings. Clothes, books, the few pieces of jewelry I owned. With each item I placed in my suitcase, memories surfaced. The sweater I wore on our first real date. The paperback novel Marcus had given me for my birthday 3 years ago, with a loving inscription I could no longer bear to read. The framed photo from our wedding day, which I now turned face down before wrapping in a t-shirt. I found the box where I kept meaningful cards and letters. 8 years of birthday cards, anniversary cards, random thinking of you notes Marcus had left in my lunch bag or on the bathroom mirror. I sat on the floor reading them one by one, searching for clues to when the man who wrote these loving words had disappeared. To my rock, my heart, my everything, one card read, "I couldn't do any of this without you." When Marcus returned to the apartment around midnight, I was still packing. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me with cold detachment. "Don't forget to leave your keys," he said, as if reminding me about a mundane chore. I looked at the stranger wearing my husband's face. "How can you do this? After everything we've been through together." "Don't be dramatic. People grow apart. It happens every day." "In 3 weeks?" "We didn't grow apart, Marcus. You changed the moment you got money." He shrugged. "Maybe the money just allowed me to be who I really am." "And who is that?" "Someone who throws away the person who loved them at their worst. Someone who doesn't have to settle anymore." He checked his watch again, a gesture that was becoming a habit. "Do you need help carrying your things downstairs? I can call the doorman." The casual cruelty of his offer broke something inside me. Tears I had been holding back spilled down my cheeks. "I never thought you could be this person." "Well, that's your fault for not seeing me clearly, isn't it?" He turned to leave the room, then paused. "I'll be staying at the Four Seasons until the divorce is finalized. The apartment will be gutted starting tomorrow afternoon." As he walked away, I found my voice one last time. "Marcus." He stopped but didn't turn around. "Don't regret this later. LOL. He turned, confusion briefly replacing the cold mask he'd been wearing. What's that supposed to mean? I just smiled through my tears and returned to my packing. Some warnings aren't meant to be understood until it's too late. I spent that night on my best friend Samantha's couch, alternating between numbness and sobbing. Samantha, who had been skeptical of Marcus from the beginning, refrained from saying, "I told you so," and simply held me while I fell apart. I gave him everything, I kept repeating. 8 years of my life. All my savings. My heart. "I know, honey," she soothed, stroking my hair. "I know." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I couldn't face putting on my uniform and caring for patients when I could barely take care of myself. Samantha left for her job as a physical therapist, promising to bring home takeout and ice cream. Alone in her apartment, I cycled through the stages of grief at warp speed. Denial. This was just a nightmare. Marcus would call any minute to apologize. Anger. How dare he discard me like yesterday's trash after everything I'd sacrificed. Bargaining. Maybe if I'd been more ambitious, more sophisticated, more worthy of his new lifestyle. Depression. I was 32, suddenly homeless, with no husband and no future. I hadn't reached acceptance yet when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Isabella Lancaster," a formal voice inquired. "Yes, that's me." I hesitated. "Well, Isabella Wilson now, I suppose." My maiden name felt foreign on my tongue after 8 years as a Lancaster. "This is Frederick Caldwell, Harold Lancaster's attorney. I'd like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. There are matters we need to discuss." Curiosity overcame my desire to hide from the world. "What kind of matters?" "I prefer not to discuss them over the phone." "Would 4 o'clock today at Riverside Cafe be convenient?" "It's a discreet location." I agreed, wondering what Harold's lawyer could possibly want with me now that Marcus and I were separating. Perhaps there was some paperwork I needed to sign, relinquishing any claim to the Lancaster fortune. As if I wanted anything from that family anymore. Riverside Cafe was a quiet establishment away from the downtown business district, the kind of place where people went for conversation rather than to be seen. Frederick Caldwell was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, his silver hair and impeccable suit making him easy to identify. "Mrs. Lancaster," he greeted me, standing politely. "Thank you for coming." "It's Ms. Wilson now," I corrected, taking the seat across from him. "Or it will be soon." He nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. So Marcus has made his move. Even sooner than Harold predicted. I blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" Frederick signaled to the waiter, ordering coffee for both of us before answering. "Isabella, may I call you Isabella? What I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. Harold Lancaster contacted me about 6 months ago, shortly after receiving his diagnosis." "Diagnosis?" "I thought he died of a heart attack." The heart attack was a complication of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Harold chose to keep his condition private, telling only myself and his doctors. This was the first I'd heard of any cancer. Not even his children knew? No. Harold was a private man. But his illness caused him to reflect on his life and his relationships, particularly with Marcus. Frederick opened his leather portfolio and removed a folder. Harold asked me to arrange a meeting with you. Do you recall having lunch with him in May? I nodded slowly. Yes, but I thought that was a coincidence. I had been trying to reconcile him with Marcus for years. It was no coincidence. Harold engineered that meeting to assess your character for himself. My coffee arrived, and I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, trying to ground myself. I don't understand. Harold had been watching Marcus's career from afar, despite their estrangement. He knew about Marcus's accomplishments as a doctor, and he knew who had supported him through medical school and residency. Frederick gave me a meaningful look. He knew about the double shifts, the loan payments, the sacrifices. I stared at him, speechless. After your lunch meeting, Harold contacted me again. He was impressed by your loyalty, your work ethic, and your genuine love for his son. He also expressed concerns about how Marcus might handle sudden wealth. He predicted this? I gestured vaguely at myself at the situation. Not the specifics, but the general outcome, yes. Harold had observed a concerning pattern with Marcus throughout his life. A tendency toward materialism when resources were available, a preoccupation with status and appearance. Frederick took a sip of his coffee. Which brings me to the purpose of our meeting. Harold's will is not exactly what it appeared to be during the initial reading. What do you mean? The will that was read was accurate but incomplete. There is a secondary document, a trust agreement, that modifies the terms substantially. He slid a document across the table. I scanned the legal language, my eyes widening as I began to understand. This says, yes, while Marcus has indeed inherited the bulk of Harold's estate, he does not have unfettered access to it. The majority, $445 million, is held in an irrevocable trust. A trust for which you, Isabella, are the sole trustee. I nearly knocked over my coffee cup. Me? But that's impossible. I'm not a family member anymore. Marcus is divorcing me. The trust was established before your separation, with you as trustee regardless of your marital status. Harold was quite explicit about this provision. But why would he do that? Frederick's expression softened slightly. Harold told me he had misjudged both you and Marcus for years. He regretted his estrangement from his son, but feared that Marcus lacked the character to handle wealth responsibly. The trust was his solution, a way to provide for Marcus while ensuring the fortune would be managed by someone with integrity. I shook my head in disbelief. Marcus doesn't know about this, does he? No. He received only the summary of the will, not the complete trust documents. I was instructed to wait until he demonstrated his true character before revealing the full terms. And throwing me out of our apartment qualified as demonstrating his character? Frederick's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Harold suggested that sudden wealth would be the ultimate test. He predicted that if Marcus was going to reveal his true nature, it would happen quickly. So what happens now? That depends largely on you. As trustee, you have significant control over how and when Marcus can access the funds. The trust has some specific requirements, certain percentages allocated to charitable causes, limits on frivolous spending, but within those parameters, you have discretion. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this extraordinary reversal of fortune. Does Marcus get anything outright? $5 million. The remainder is in the trust, which you control. $5 million was still an enormous sum, but compared to $445 million, it was a fraction of what Marcus thought he had inherited. He's already spending like he has unlimited funds, I said. He's staying at the Four Seasons, buying watches that cost more than cars, redecorating the apartment. Yes, I've been monitoring the accounts. His spending has been quite enthusiastic. A thought occurred to me. Does he know you're meeting with me? No. And he won't, unless you choose to tell him. Frederick closed his portfolio. Take some time to think about this, Isabella. Review the trust documents carefully. When you're ready to proceed, contact me and we'll arrange for the formal transfer of trustee powers." As I left the cafe, my mind was spinning with possibilities. Part of me wanted to call Marcus immediately and throw this in his face. Another part wanted nothing to do with him or the Lancaster fortune. But mostly, I felt a strange sense of responsibility. Harold had entrusted me with this role for a reason. Despite everything, I couldn't help wondering what the right thing to do would be. Over the next week, I read the trust documents carefully, consulted with my own lawyer, paid for with a small advance from the trust that Frederick arranged, and thought deeply about my next steps. I moved from Samantha's couch to a modest, but comfortable furnished apartment, paying 3 months' rent in advance with my savings. I returned to work, finding solace in the familiar routines of patient care. The hospital was the one place where I still felt like myself, where my identity wasn't tied to Marcus or the Lancaster name. Frederick called periodically with updates. Marcus had already gone through almost $1 million. He had ordered a custom sports car, put a deposit on a beachfront property, and was regularly spending 5-figure sums at exclusive clubs and restaurants. He's requested access to additional capital for a major investment, Frederick informed me. I've been delaying, saying the funds are tied up in complex financial instruments that take time to liquidate. How long can you stall him? Not much longer. He's becoming increasingly insistent. I believe we're approaching the moment of truth. I took a deep breath. Then let's set it up. I'm ready. Together, we planned the confrontation that would change everything. Marcus stormed into Frederick's office on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after our dinner at Giovanni's. I watched his arrival on the security monitor in Frederick's private conference room, where I'd been waiting for the past hour. Even through the grainy black and white footage, I could see his agitation in the way he moved, the aggressive set of his shoulders. "This is unacceptable," I heard him say through the monitor. "I've been trying to access my funds for over a week. I have time-sensitive investment opportunities that won't wait." Frederick's response was too quiet to hear, but I saw him gesture toward his office. Marcus followed, his expensive Italian loafers clicking on the hardwood floor. The door closed behind them. "Mr. Lancaster," Frederick began formally, his voice now coming through the intercom system he had discreetly activated. "There seem to be some misunderstandings about your inheritance." "The only misunderstanding is why my money isn't available to me," Marcus snapped. "I'm the primary beneficiary of my father's will. $450 million, plus controlling interest in Lancaster developments." Those were his exact words. Actually, Frederick corrected gently, the exact words matter quite a bit in legal documents. "Your father left you the remainder of his estate, estimated at $450 million. But there were conditions attached to that remainder." "What conditions?" There were no conditions mentioned at the reading. The reading covered the basic distribution of assets. The complete terms were detailed in supplementary documents, which you would have received had you not been in such a rush to, shall we say, adjust your lifestyle. I could imagine Marcus's expression, the tightening around his eyes that always happened when he felt challenged. "What supplementary documents?" "Show me." "Certainly. But first, there's someone else who should be part of this conversation." That was my cue. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my simple black dress, not designer, but classic and dignified, and opened the connecting door to Frederick's office. The look on Marcus's face when he saw me was worth every tear I had shed. Shock, confusion, and the first flickers of alarm crossed his features in rapid succession. "Bella? What are you doing here?" "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly, taking the seat next to Frederick. "I believe we have some business to discuss." Marcus looked back and forth between us. "What is this? Some kind of shakedown? If you think this will get you a better divorce settlement." Frederick interrupted smoothly. "This has nothing to do with your divorce proceedings, Mr. Lancaster. Ms. Wilson is here in her capacity as trustee of the Harold Lancaster Family Trust." "Trustee? What are you talking about?" Frederick slid a document across the desk. "This is the complete trust agreement that governs your inheritance. As you'll see in Section 3, Paragraph 2, while you are the beneficiary of the trust, Ms. Wilson has been designated as the sole trustee. Marcus snatched up the document, his eyes scanning the text frantically. His face paled as he read further. "This is a forgery," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I assure you it's authentic," Frederick replied. "Signed by your father in the presence of 2 witnesses and notarized by my associate. You received $5 million outright, as specified in the will. The remaining $445 million is held in the trust, which Ms. Wilson controls." Marcus turned to me, his expression transforming from shock to fury. "You knew about this? This was your plan all along." "I knew nothing about it until after you threw me out of our apartment," I said truthfully. "Your father arranged everything before his death." "I don't believe you." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing the office. "This is some kind of sick joke. You can't possibly expect me to believe my father would give control of my inheritance to my ex-wife." "Soon-to-be ex-wife," I corrected. "And your father had his reasons." Frederick pressed a button on his desk phone. "Sandra, please bring in the video recording." A moment later, his assistant entered with a laptop, which she set up on the desk before quietly exiting. "Your father recorded a message to be played in exactly this scenario," Frederick explained, pressing play. Harold Lancaster's face appeared on the screen. He looked gaunt but determined, clearly recording this near the end of his life. Despite his illness, his voice was strong and authoritative. "Marcus," he began without preamble, "if you're watching this, then events have unfolded as I predicted. You've discovered that your inheritance is not entirely under your control, and I imagine you're feeling betrayed and angry. Good. Now you know how Isabella must have felt when you discarded her the moment you thought you had money." Marcus flinched visibly. "I've been watching your career from a distance," Harold continued. "I know about your accomplishments as a doctor, and I know exactly who made those accomplishments possible. While you were studying and training, Isabella was working double shifts to support you. While you were focused on your career, she was paying off your student loans. She believed in you when I didn't, and she invested everything she had in your future." Harold's eyes seemed to bore into Marcus through the screen. "I made many mistakes as a father, but I raised you to recognize value. Real value, not the superficial trappings of wealth. Isabella has demonstrated her value through years of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. You, on the other hand, have demonstrated that without proper oversight, you would squander both your inheritance and your character." Harold paused, taking a labored breath. "This arrangement isn't punishment, son. It's wisdom. Isabella has proven herself to be prudent, responsible, and compassionate, exactly the qualities needed to manage the Lancaster legacy. The trust gives her authority to release funds for legitimate business operations, reasonable living expenses, and worthwhile investments. What it prevents is the kind of reckless spending you've already begun." Marcus had stopped pacing and stood frozen, staring at his father's image. "Consider this my final lesson to you," Harold concluded. "True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in relationships. You had a woman who loved you at your worst and helped you become your best. If you've thrown that away for the illusion of something better, then you're a bigger fool than I ever was. And I was quite a fool." The video ended. The office was silent except for Marcus's ragged breathing. "This can't be legal," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "I'll contest it. I'll hire the best lawyers in the country." "You're welcome to try," Frederick replied mildly. "However, as I mentioned at the will reading, your father ensured this arrangement is legally ironclad. Contesting it would only deplete your $5 million with legal fees, with virtually no chance of success." Marcus turned to me, his anger now mixed with desperation. "Bella, be reasonable. We can work something out. We were married for 8 years. You can't just take control of my inheritance." "I'm not taking anything, Marcus. Your father gave me this responsibility because he trusted me. And unlike you, I intend to honor that trust." "You're fired," Marcus suddenly said to Frederick, pointing a shaking finger at him. "I'm in charge of Lancaster Developments now. I'll hire a new legal team immediately." Frederick actually laughed at this, a gentle, almost sympathetic chuckle. "I don't work for you, Mr. Lancaster. I work for the trust, which is now under Ms. Wilson's direction. If anyone has the authority to terminate my services, it's her." Marcus sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. So what happens now? Bella controls everything? My money, the company, my life. Not everything, I clarified. You have $5 million that's completely yours. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. And as trustee, I'm bound by the terms of the trust, which include providing for your reasonable needs. Reasonable according to whom? You. Yes, I said simply. Me. Marcus stared at me, his face a complex mix of emotions, anger, disbelief, and something that might have been dawning respect. Or perhaps that was just my imagination. Have you read the will carefully? Frederick asked him quietly. All of it, not just the parts that mention dollar amounts? Marcus's blank look was answer enough. Perhaps you should, Frederick suggested, sliding another document across the desk. Particularly the section about the conditions under which trusteeship could be transferred back to you. As Marcus reluctantly took the document, I stood to leave. I had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to him. Bella, Marcus called as I reached the door. Wait. I turned, keeping my expression neutral. Did you know? When you said, don't regret this later. LOL, did you already know about the trust? I allowed myself a small smile. No. But I knew you well enough to know that someday, somehow, you'd regret throwing away someone who loved you for who you were, not what you had. I walked out, leaving Marcus with the knowledge that he had gambled everything on wealth and status and lost what truly mattered in the process. The weeks following that confrontation in Frederick's office were a period of profound transition. With Frederick's guidance, I established a formal office for managing the Lancaster Family Trust. We hired a small team of financial advisors and administrators to handle day-to-day operations while I continued my nursing career. I refused to give up the work I loved, the work that had defined me long before I became unexpectedly wealthy by proxy. My first major decision as trustee was establishing the Lancaster Medical Scholarship Foundation. Using $20 million from the trust, we created a program specifically for medical students from disadvantaged backgrounds who demonstrated both academic excellence and community commitment. The scholarships covered full tuition and included living stipends, eliminating the financial burden that had nearly crushed Marcus during his education. Your father would have approved, Frederick commented when I presented the proposal. He valued education and self-reliance. My second initiative was closer to my heart, a comprehensive support program for nurses at Memorial Hospital. The program funded continuing education, provided mental health resources, and established a childcare center for staff with young children. I knew firsthand the challenges nurses faced, the sacrifices they made daily. This was my way of honoring the profession that had sustained me through my darkest times. As for Marcus, I established a monthly stipend of $15,000, generous by normal standards, but modest compared to the unlimited funds he thought he'd have. Access to additional money required my approval and was contingent on productive use. Business investments, continuing medical education, legitimate charitable giving, these I would fund. Luxury cars, private jets, and yacht parties I would not. The stipend came with one significant condition: community service. For every dollar Marcus received from the trust, he had to document 1 minute of volunteer work at public hospitals or clinics. To receive his full monthly amount, he needed to volunteer approximately 6 hours per week, less than a single shift for most healthcare workers. Marcus initially railed against these restrictions. He hired lawyers to challenge the trust as threatened, but Frederick had been right about the legal standing of Harold's arrangements. After wasting nearly $200,000 in legal fees, Marcus grudgingly accepted his new reality. Alexandra and Thomas, meanwhile, attempted to curry favor with me once they understood my position as trustee. Alexandra invited me to lunch at exclusive restaurants, casually mentioning investment opportunities that would benefit us both. Thomas sent expensive gifts to my office with notes suggesting we collaborate on family business matters. I declined the lunches and returned the gifts. I had no interest in their sudden friendliness, which was as transparently self-serving as Marcus's rejection had been cruel. Instead, I worked with Frederick to ensure they received fair compensation for their roles in the company without giving them the control they coveted. 6 months after Harold's death, I purchased a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a pleasant neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion or a penthouse, just a well-built house with a garden where I could plant flowers and vegetables, something I'd always wanted but never had space for in our apartment. I furnished it simply but with quality pieces meant to last. No $60,000 watches for me, no sports cars or designer wardrobes. My most expensive indulgence was a grand piano, something I had dreamed of owning since childhood piano lessons. I continued working as a nurse, though I reduced my hours to 3 days a week to accommodate my trustee responsibilities. My colleagues were curious about my sudden association with the Lancaster fortune. The story had made local news, but treated me essentially the same. To them, I was still just Bella, the nurse who brought homemade cookies to staff meetings and stayed late to sit with frightened patients. Occasionally, I would encounter Marcus at charity functions or hospital events. The first few meetings were tense, his resentment palpable in clipped words and avoided eye contact. But as months passed, something shifted. The volunteer work that had begun as an obligation gradually became a source of genuine satisfaction for him. Patients responded to his skills as a cardiologist, and his colleagues noted his growing compassion. One evening, nearly a year after our separation, I attended a fundraiser for the hospital's new pediatric wing. Marcus was there, without the flashy accessories he'd briefly favored during his wealth-induced personality change. He approached me during the cocktail hour, looking more like the man I had married than the stranger he had become. "The Scholarship Foundation is doing great work," he said after an awkward greeting. "I've been mentoring 2 of the recipients." "I know," I replied. "They speak highly of you." He seemed surprised that I kept track of his activities. "I'm not just doing it for the stipend, you know." "I know that too." A silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Marcus took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology, Bella. Not just for how I ended our marriage, but for failing to appreciate everything you did during it." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. I found none. "My father was right about you," he continued when I didn't immediately respond. "And about me? Money didn't change me, it revealed me. Revealed parts of myself I'm not proud of." "Recognition is the first step to change," I said quietly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About what really matters. About the kind of person I want to be." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not asking for reconciliation or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now, and I'm sorry." It was perhaps the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Over the following months, we established a new relationship, not as husband and wife, but as 2 people connected by history and shared purpose. Marcus continued his volunteer work even after I increased his stipend in recognition of his genuine effort. He eventually moved out of his luxury apartment and bought a modest house not unlike mine, focusing on his medical practice rather than the trappings of wealth. As for me, I began dating again 18 months after the divorce was finalized. James was a pediatric surgeon I met through hospital committees, intelligent, kind, and secure enough in himself to be unthreatened by my unusual financial position. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the desperate need that had characterized my early years with Marcus. 3 years after Harold's death, I officially amended the trust to give Marcus more direct control over certain aspects of his inheritance, though I maintained oversight of the larger financial decisions. It was a gesture of recognition for the growth he had demonstrated, the character he had developed through his own hard choices rather than external pressure. "You could have kept complete control," Frederick observed when I signed the documents. Harold's provisions allowed for that option. "The point wasn't to punish Marcus indefinitely," I explained. "It was to give him time to become the person his father hoped he could be. The person I always believed he was beneath the ambition and insecurity." Frederick nodded thoughtfully. "Harold would be pleased with how you've managed things, Isabella. With how you've managed all of this." Looking back on the journey from betrayal to empowerment, I realized that Harold's unusual bequest had been a gift to both Marcus and me. For Marcus, it was the opportunity to develop integrity and perspective that mere wealth couldn't provide. For me, it was the chance to discover strength I never knew I possessed. Money doesn't change who we are, it amplifies what was already there. Marcus's materialism and status-seeking had always existed beneath the surface of our relationship, hidden by necessity rather than absent entirely. My own values, compassion, practicality, loyalty, remained intact despite access to wealth beyond anything I had imagined. The greatest lesson from this extraordinary chapter of my life wasn't about money at all. It was about recognizing our own worth independent of external validation. About building a life aligned with our truest values rather than societal expectations. About the power of forgiveness, not as absolution for those who hurt us, but as liberation for ourselves. I still wear my nurse's scrubs 3 days a week. I still clip coupons out of habit. I still drive a sensible car and brew coffee at home instead of buying expensive lattes. These aren't deprivations, but choices that reflect who I am, who I've always been. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity of our choices, the authenticity of our relationships, and the peace we find within ourselves. That's a fortune no one can inherit, and no one can take away. What would you do if you were suddenly given control of millions of dollars? Would it change you, or simply reveal who you've always been? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need this reminder about what truly matters in life. Thank you for listening to my journey from heartbreak to healing, and remember that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest wounds.